I mean, I guess all of these trends we've seen elsewhere on maybe smaller scale or a wider time horizon. I think the interesting thing here is just how quickly this happened. And if you kind of think about it, say back in 2016, members were paying a certain amount, and the NRA was spending on a lot of things. So if you're a member and you like what they're spending on, you'd say we're getting a lot of bang for our buck. Now, like you said, members, revenues are down, but member dues are still bringing in a good chunk of revenue. The amount of money spent on things that you can call, servicing members directly has shrunk really drastically. And ultimately, what you're pointing to, I think, is one of the big risks that's out there for them. They've sort of right-sized their budget in a way that the expenses better match what the revenues are now. Um, but how are donors or members, in this case, more members, how are they going to feel about that? If all those programs are cut to that level, do they still feel like they're getting their enough bang for their buck with their membership dues? And I think that's the big open question.
And you've and I want to get into what you think some of the consequences of that will be in a moment, but there's also like questions about why, obviously when you get a document like this and it gives you the expenses and revenue for every department across the organization, it's easy to go in there and say, why are they spending here and not there? And you're just kind of acting as a director yourself, a director from the outside. Right? And so it's easy. You can come up with all kinds of questions of why did you guys prefer this thing over that? But I think there's a lot of fair questions to that point. I mean, especially with the way that they've funded general operations, they're, the safety and training, law enforcement, competitive shooting. A lot of these things are actually bringing in money for them more than they cost. So it's, it's weird that they've cut so much from them. When there actually seem to be profit generating areas of the organization. For example, education and training, they spent $431,000 on that, and it brought in $2.3 million for them. So it was positive by $1.8 million. And it's like, why didn't they act to put more resources into that area? It's just kind of odd. Some of the decisions that were made, I guess it's, obviously you're not on the board, so you can't really justify
No,
it for us.
there's no inside information as to how they work. I mean, I guess the one caution or caveat in interpreting this is, especially for internal accounting numbers, it's hard to know how they got to the point they got to there with those internal numbers, and so how best to interpret them without hearing from someone inside the organization.
That's fair
one
point.
challenge, especially on the education side, is I can't say for certain, but my guess would be a lot of the educational activities they conduct are reimbursed or given in the form of grants from the foundation, because education certainly could fit with the foundation's mission.
That does make a lot of sense. Yes, that's a good point.
So it might be easier to support those things financially because the foundation does have plenty of resources. They just happen to be much more restricted as to what they can be used for.
Sure. Although one piece that I did a members only piece on this, but there is some information on like the foundation and the other 501c3s that the NRA is affiliated with as part of this larger conglomeration. And one of those areas is in planned giving, right? And they have a breakout here of the planned giving that they bring in each year. How many of the planned giving is basically, this is a state and trust giving. It's just people will write the NRA into their will. So when they pass away, the NRA gets some percentage of their estate. And this actually, I spoke to a former staffer at Planned Giving who worked in this area at the NRA for years, and they told me that it can actually, I know a lot of people will think that's rich people are giving them money when they pass away, and they're giving, and that's true, that happens. But apparently, this is something that's common among all kinds of NRA members. Whether you're rich or poor, it doesn't matter. A lot of people will leave. Some people who aren't wealthy will leave everything they have to the NRA because they believe in the mission so much. And this has been a fairly significant portion of their fundraising for years. It's not the majority, but according to this document, they've brought in $132 million in planned giving between 2006 and 2020. So, it's a lot of money, and they still have another $335 million already pledged to them in this way. But the issue comes in when you look at the numbers through 2020 and the numbers especially through the first 8 months of 2021, where, for instance, in 2019, they had signed up $36.5 million worth of revenue from this, new pledges that put the NRA in their will, essentially. By 2020, it had fallen to $22.2 million. And then through the first 8 months of 2021, it had fallen all the way to $5.4 million. And this is a number for the entire organization. That includes the foundation, which is also a huge beneficiary of this kind of giving. But it includes their Civil Rights Defense Fund, which they use to fund, gun rights lawsuits. The Freedom Action Fund, which is a get out the vote nonprofit, 501c3. The Special Contribution Fund, which is used to help run their shooting center out in New Mexico. Is it the Whittinger Center? I apologize, I've mispronounced the name there, but it's a shooting and hunting preserve that the NRA runs, and they use a nonprofit to fund that. And then, you have the C4 and ILA also get these sorts of gifts. And so the drop off there has been incredible. Have you ever seen something like that? I mean, at other nonprofits of the size of the NRA?
Yeah, I guess not to just keep coming with accountant caveats here, but
right.
The one caveat, it depends on how the accounting is done and what permits them to record this. For if this were an audited GAAP financial statement, there's very particular rules about at what point can you record this as being a contribution. It has to be an unconditional gift. It has to be.
This isn't. This is just them. They're just talking about the documentation establishing a trust.
Yeah. So, like internally speaking, what they might record as "we have now received a gift" might not count for accounting purposes. But either way, whichever way they get to this, with planned giving, you often see huge fluctuations because if you have like one big gift, might get recorded 1 year, even if it's going to come
this
in
isn't
cash
money brought
over
in.
Years, right?
Right. This isn't money brought in. This is money that's pledged, and it's been pretty consistent according to this document until the last 2 years. I was going to say
the one thing is that they have actually seen some consistency, so it might reflect that they have a wider set of donors here.
Mm-hmm. Apparently
so there can be fluctuations. And as you hinted, a lot of this involves tax planning. So a lot of that's going to go, more likely than not, more of it's going to be going into the C3s, particularly the foundation.
Certainly. Yeah.
Which somewhat limits what can be done with that from the NRA standpoint. But I think another thing which you had pointed out previously, their advancement staff, the people who work on getting these donations has dropped quite a bit. And so one would expect their ability to raise money in this form is also going to drop. So we can't say for sure whether this is a new normal for them, this huge drop off. Mm-hmm. But the fact that they've cut back on staff in this realm would suggest it's likely to see decreases. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it's just to me like that kind of person who gives the NRA their estate in their will or some percentage of it, like that's got, presumably that's some of your most loyal supporters. You're not getting your fence sitting type supporters to give you money in their will most of the time. So when it seems as though you're getting a relatively consistent amount of pledges each year to this, and then you have a sudden decrease, that would just indicate to me, especially in connection with the other stuff we mentioned just about regular membership declining as well. And it might be really,
like you said, regular memberships declining. Some of that might be the form of short-term memberships, but I think you might see the biggest effect on something like this. And think about it this way, that, a lot of these planned gifts, they take the form of, yeah, it's some sort of legacy gift. It doesn't have to necessarily be in a estate, but some sort of legacy
Sure.
gift where we're thinking, I want to support the long-term mission here. And if you think, if the organization recently filed for bankruptcy, it does raise a lot of questions about this, the long-term sustainability uh, from a donor standpoint. So it's much harder to convince donors to make a legacy gift at the same time the organization is saying we're bankrupt.
Yeah,
And the
and as you
bankruptcy didn't
mentioned,
work out the way they intended, and in
right,
fact they were quick to say we're bankrupt, but not that type of bankrupt, right?
right, of
um,
course,
but
that's
still, it makes it harder. It
caveat.
makes it harder to get those sorts of gifts.